At a funeral for a young mother, I was giving the eulogy when her 9-year-old daughter suddenly ran to the casket, turned to face my congregation and sobbed, "Mommy told me to find my real daddy when she's gone." The church fell silent when she pointed directly at me and whispered, "She said, 'It's you.'" As a priest bound by sacred vows, I thought I understood my calling, until this moment shattered everything I believed about family, faith, and the mysterious ways God works through our broken lives. Friends, I've walked alongside the faithful for over 2 decades now, serving as shepherd to God's flock here at St. Joseph's Parish for the past 12 years. Through all my time in ministry, I thought I grasped the true meaning of sacred calling, understood the boundaries of pastoral care, and knew precisely what it meant to bear the responsibility that comes with this collar around my neck. How wrong I was. My name is Father Michael O'Brien, and the story I'm sharing today will shake the very foundation of everything you believe about divine providence, human sacrifice, and the unfathomable ways our Lord works through our broken lives. It started on what seemed like any other Tuesday morning this past March, a day that would forever change my understanding of God's mysterious plan. The early morning light filtered through St. Joseph's beautiful stained glass windows, painting our wooden pews in brilliant reds and blues as I prepared my heart for one of the most challenging funeral services I'd ever conducted. Maria Sanchez, only 34 years young, had finished her courageous battle with cancer, leaving behind her precious 9-year-old daughter, Sophia. Our sanctuary felt thick with sorrow as parishioners gathered, their hushed conversations reflecting the deep love they held for this remarkable woman. Maria had been part of our church family for 3 years now, ever since she and little Sophia first stepped through our welcoming doors. She was absolutely radiant, always dressed beautifully with her hair styled just so, carrying herself with an elegance that seemed effortless. Maria poured her whole heart into our parish community, volunteering tirelessly for every fundraiser, every outreach program, every fellowship gathering we organized. Yet despite her incredible dedication to our church family, she kept her personal history closely guarded, never sharing details about her past or the life she'd lived before finding us. Standing there at the altar that morning, smoothing my vestments and reviewing the eulogy I'd carefully prepared, I felt that familiar, inexplicable ache deep within my chest. Destin Gisisas, the same mysterious emptiness that had originally called me toward seminary many years ago. It felt as though some essential piece of my very soul had been removed, leaving me constantly searching for something I couldn't identify or name. Countless nights I'd knelt in fervent prayer, pleading with the Almighty to reveal what was missing, to fill that persistent void with His perfect peace. Ministry seemed like the answer. Bringing comfort to grieving families like Maria's felt like my true purpose. Our church filled steadily throughout the morning. Regular members of our congregation mixed with unfamiliar faces. Maria's co-workers, neighborhood friends, parents from Sophia's elementary school. The little girl sat quietly in our front pew, her dark hair woven into careful braids, wearing a simple black dress that made her appear even tinier than her 9 years. She maintained remarkable composure for such a young child facing unimaginable loss, though I could see profound questions swimming in her dark eyes, the same questions every child wrestles with when confronted by death's harsh reality. "Beloved brothers and sisters," I began, allowing my voice to carry across our hushed sanctuary. "We've come together today not simply to mourn Maria Sanchez's passing, but to celebrate a life lived with tremendous purpose, overflowing love, and unshakable faith in our Savior Jesus Christ." I spoke lovingly about Maria's devotion to our parish family, her gentle spirit, her fierce protective love for her daughter. I drew comfort from Psalm 23's timeless words about walking through death's dark valley. Our congregation responded with understanding nods, some dabbing tears with tissues, others reaching out to clasp their neighbors' hands in shared grief. Maria truly understood, I continued with growing passion, that our earthly journey represents just one chapter in the eternal story our Creator writes for each precious soul. She faced her illness with courage that inspired everyone blessed to know her, spending her final months not wallowing in despair, but preparing her beloved daughter for the path ahead, preparing her own heart for the glorious reunion awaiting us, all in paradise. That's exactly when everything changed. As I paused to look down at Sophia, expecting to see a child finding comfort in these words about her mother's eternal rest, she suddenly rose to her feet. Without any warning, without the slightest hesitation, she walked directly toward her mother's flower-covered casket. Our entire congregation collectively held its breath as this small figure approached the polished coffin, her tiny hands trembling as she reached out to touch the gleaming wood. Then Sophia turned to face all of us, 200 pairs of eyes focused entirely on this grieving child, and her clear voice rang out with startling authority in the absolute silence of our sacred space. "Mommy told me," she declared, her words carrying impossible weight for someone so young, "that when she went to be with Jesus, I should find my real daddy." Our church became so silent you could hear the old furnace cycling, distant traffic sounds from the street, and the thundering of my own heartbeat. Sophia's searching eyes swept across our congregation, and I felt something cold and terrible settling in the pit of my stomach as her gaze found mine and held it. She pointed directly at me with unwavering certainty, her small finger steady as a compass needle, and whispered words that would haunt my soul forever. She said, "It's you." In that devastating moment, standing before my beloved congregation in my sacred robes, clutching my carefully prepared notes about eternal peace and divine plans, I felt reality crumble beneath my feet. The hollow ache I'd carried in my chest for so many years, that unexplained emptiness defining my spiritual journey, suddenly transformed into something terrifying and profound. Sophia's declaration hung in our sanctuary's air like both blessing and curse, and I found myself staring into the face of a child whose features bore an unsettling resemblance to my own reflection. The silence stretched endlessly, heavy with shock and bewilderment. Mrs. Henderson gasped audibly from the third pew. Our funeral director shifted uncomfortably near the entrance. And I stood there, a man of God who had counseled hundreds of families through their darkest valleys, completely and utterly speechless. Because in that earth-shattering moment, looking into Sophia's earnest face while feeling the crushing weight of 200 stares, I realized that some prayers receive answers in ways we never anticipate, and some revelations destroy everything we thought we knew about ourselves. What unfolded next will absolutely blow your mind and reveal secrets about love, sacrifice, and divine mystery that will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about faith itself. The hours following that funeral service felt like walking through a fog so thick I could barely see my own hands. After everyone had left St. Joseph's that Tuesday afternoon, I found myself alone in the sanctuary, still wearing my vestments, staring at the empty space where Maria's casket had been just hours before. Sophia's words echoed endlessly through my mind. She said, "It's you." How does a man of God process such a moment? Where do you turn when your entire understanding of your own life gets called into question by a grieving child? I knelt before the altar where I'd prayed countless times over the past 12 years, but this time felt different. This time I wasn't seeking guidance for my congregation. I was desperately searching for answers about myself. "Lord," I whispered into the sacred silence, "what are you trying to tell me? What truth am I missing?" You see, my path to priesthood wasn't typical. Many of my seminary brothers felt called from childhood, but my journey began much later. I was 33 when I finally answered what I believed was God's voice calling me to serve. Before that, I'd lived what most would consider a normal life. I'd worked in construction, had relationships, even came close to marriage once. But something always felt incomplete, like I was searching for a purpose that remained just beyond my reach. The emptiness I mentioned earlier, that hollow ache in my chest, had been my constant companion since my early 20s. I'd tried filling it with work, with relationships, with travel, but nothing seemed to touch that deep void. When I finally surrendered my life to Christ and entered seminary, I thought I'd found my answer. The priesthood gave me meaning, purpose, and most importantly, peace. Or so I believed. St. Joseph's Parish became my home in ways I'd never experienced before. This community of believers welcomed me with open hearts when I arrived 12 years ago, fresh from my previous assignment in a small town upstate. Our congregation might number only about 300 families, but each one holds a special place in my heart. There's the Rodriguez family, Miguel and Carmen, who've been married 47 years and still hold hands during Mass. Their grandson Tommy was my first altar server here, and I had the privilege of performing his wedding ceremony just last year. The Johnsons lost their teenage son in a car accident 5 years ago, and watching them rebuild their faith through that tragedy taught me more about resilience than any seminary course ever could. Then there's elderly Mrs. Patterson, who bakes fresh bread for our food pantry every Wednesday without fail, despite her arthritis making it increasingly difficult. She reminds me constantly that service to others isn't about convenience. It's about love in action. These precious souls have become more than parishioners. They're family. I've baptized their babies, married their children, buried their parents, and walked alongside them through every season of life. They trust me with their deepest fears, their greatest joys, their most shameful secrets. That trust represents something sacred, something I've never taken lightly, which brings me back to Maria and Sophia. When they first appeared at St. Joseph's 3 years ago, something about them captured my attention immediately. Maria carried herself with remarkable grace, but there was something in her eyes, a mixture of determination and sadness that spoke of deep waters beneath her polished surface. She threw herself into parish life with an intensity that was both admirable and puzzling. I remember our first real conversation after a Wednesday evening Bible study. Most of the group had already headed home, but Maria lingered, helping me stack chairs and clean up. "Father Michael," she said suddenly, "do you believe God can use our mistakes to create something beautiful?" The question caught me off guard. "Absolutely," I replied. Romans 8:28 promises us that all things work together for good for those who love God and are called according to His purpose. "Why do you ask?" She smiled then, but it was tinged with melancholy. Sometimes I wonder if the hardest choices we make are actually the most loving ones, even when they break our hearts. At the time, I thought she was speaking generally, perhaps reflecting on her own past struggles. Now, sitting in that empty sanctuary with Sophia's accusation still ringing in my ears, I wondered if there had been something more specific behind her words. Sophia was equally intriguing. Unlike many children who fidget through services, she sat perfectly still during Mass, her dark eyes taking in everything with remarkable focus. She was bright beyond her years, asking theological questions that would challenge seminary students. "Father Michael," she once asked after a children's sermon about the Good Shepherd, "if Jesus is our shepherd, does that mean He knows exactly where we are, even when we're lost?" "Yes, sweetheart," I'd answered. "He never loses sight of any of His sheep. Even when we don't know who we really are," she'd pressed. Again, I thought it was just childhood curiosity. Now I wondered if she'd been asking something far more personal. The bond I felt with this little girl defied explanation. From our very first meeting, I experienced an almost paternal instinct toward her, a protective urge that went beyond normal pastoral care. When she scraped her knee at last year's church picnic, I felt her pain as acutely as if she were my own child. When she struggled with math homework during our after-school program, I found myself staying late to help her, treasuring every moment of her breakthrough smiles. Maria noticed my special attention to Sophia, but she never seemed concerned. If anything, she appeared grateful for the bond we shared. "Sophia needs strong male role models," she told me once. "Her biological father, well, let's just say he's not in the picture." I never pressed for details. In my experience, single mothers in our congregation often carried painful stories they weren't ready to share. My role was to provide support and guidance, not to pry into private matters. But now, kneeling in the sanctuary with Sophia's words echoing through my soul, I found myself questioning every interaction, every conversation, every moment I'd shared with this family. Was there something I'd missed? Some sign I should have recognized? The rational part of my mind rejected Sophia's claim completely. How could I be her father when I'd never even met Maria before 3 years ago? The timeline made no sense. Yet something deeper, something beyond logic, stirred uneasily in my chest. I opened my Bible to Jeremiah 1:5. Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Before you were born, I set you apart. God's sovereignty extends beyond our understanding, His plans reaching into places we can't see or comprehend. Was it possible that His hand had been guiding this situation in ways I couldn't grasp? As evening shadows lengthened across our sanctuary floor, I made a decision that would change everything. I would take temporary custody of Sophia, not because I believed her extraordinary claim, but because she was a child in need, and caring for the vulnerable is fundamental to our calling as Christians. But I also knew I needed to seek the truth, whatever that might cost me. If there was even the slightest possibility that Sophia's words contained some grain of truth, I owed it to her, to Maria's memory, and to my own conscience to investigate. Little did I realize that this decision would lead me down a path of discovery so shocking, so profound, that it would force me to question everything I thought I knew about love, sacrifice, and the mysterious ways our Heavenly Father works through broken human hearts. What I discovered about my own past will leave you absolutely speechless, and the truth about Maria's sacrifice will redefine everything you think you know about a mother's love. The week following Maria's funeral brought an unexpected turn that I couldn't have anticipated. Sophia came to live temporarily in our parish rectory while I searched for relatives who might care for her. What should have been a straightforward process of finding family members quickly revealed itself as something far more complex and troubling. "I don't have any other family, Father Michael," Sophia insisted on her third day with me, sitting at my kitchen table working on homework while I prepared Sunday's sermon. "Mama always said it was just us two, and now it's just me and you." Her matter-of-fact tone unnerved me. Most children in her situation would be desperate to find aunts, uncles, grandparents, anyone who represented family connection. But Sophia spoke with a certainty that suggested she knew something the rest of us didn't. That Sunday morning brought my first real test as a man trying to serve God while wrestling with personal turmoil. Standing before my beloved congregation, I found myself studying faces I'd known for years with fresh eyes. The Henderson family sat in their usual third pew, their teenage daughter Ashley looking pale and withdrawn. Had she always seemed so uncomfortable during services, or was I noticing something new? "Today we're exploring the parable of the lost sheep," I began, my voice steadier than I felt. "Jesus tells us that a shepherd will leave 99 sheep to search for one that's gone astray. But what happens when the shepherd himself becomes lost?" The words came from a place deeper than conscious preparation. I watched my congregation's faces as I spoke about shepherds who lose their way, about the responsibility we bear for those in our care, about the courage required to face uncomfortable truths. Several parishioners shifted uncomfortably, and I wondered if my spiritual struggle was more transparent than I'd intended. After the service, Martha Williams approached me with tears in her eyes. Martha had been a faithful member of St. Joseph's for nearly 20 years, raising 3 children mostly on her own after her husband left when the youngest was still in diapers. "Father," she whispered, glancing around to ensure we weren't overheard, "that sermon really spoke to me today. Sometimes I feel like I've been lost for so long I don't even remember what it feels like to be found." Something in her tone caught my attention. Martha had always been one of our most dedicated volunteers, seemingly strong and capable. But looking at her now, I noticed dark circles under her eyes, a tremor in her hands that I'd attributed to too much coffee. "Martha, is everything all right at home?" I asked gently. She started to answer, then stopped, her eyes darting toward the parking lot where her 16-year-old son Jake was helping younger kids into their parents' cars. "Father, if someone you trusted, if they weren't who you thought they were, what would you do?" Before I could respond, she hurried away, leaving me with more questions than answers. That afternoon, while Sophia napped on the rectory couch, I found myself walking through our church cemetery, seeking solace among the headstones of parishioners I'd laid to rest over the years. The spring air carried the scent of fresh grass and blooming dogwoods, but I felt no peace. My phone buzzed with a text from Rebecca Torres, one of our youth group leaders. "Father Mike, can we talk privately this week? It's about one of the kids in our program. I'm concerned." Rebecca's message sent a chill through me. She'd been working with our teenagers for 3 years, ever since she moved to town after finishing her social work degree. If Rebecca was concerned about one of our young people, it was serious. The next evening, Rebecca arrived at the rectory after Sophia had gone to bed. She looked exhausted, her usually bright demeanor replaced by something that resembled fear. "Father, I need to share something with you, but I'm not sure how," she began, accepting the cup of tea I offered with shaking hands. "It's about some of our youth group kids. I've been noticing patterns, behaviors that concern me professionally." "What kind of patterns?" I asked, though part of me dreaded the answer. Withdrawal, anxiety, certain physical signs that suggest— She paused, struggling with the words. "Father, I think some of our young people might be experiencing situations at home that aren't safe." The room felt suddenly cold, despite the warm spring evening. "Have any of them spoken to you directly?" "Not exactly, but Ashley Henderson asked me last week if there was anywhere kids could go if they couldn't trust the adults in their lives. And Tommy Rodriguez, you know how outgoing he usually is, he's been having trouble sleeping, falling behind in school." My mind raced through recent interactions with these families. The Hendersons were pillars of our community. Bob served on our finance committee, and Linda coordinated our women's ministry. The Rodriguez family had been members since before I arrived, their faith seemingly unshakable. "Rebecca, as a mandated reporter, what are your legal obligations here?" She looked miserable. "That's what makes this so difficult. I have suspicions based on behavioral observations, but no direct disclosures. Without concrete evidence or a child speaking up directly, my hands are tied. I was hoping you might have heard something in confession or counseling that could help me understand what's happening." Her words hit me like a physical blow. Here was a trained professional asking for guidance about protecting children, and I was bound by sacred vows that prevented me from sharing anything learned in confidence. The irony wasn't lost on me. As a priest, I was supposed to be a protector of the innocent, yet my very role might prevent me from fulfilling that calling. "I understand your position," I said carefully. "Let's both commit to watching these young people more closely and creating safe opportunities for them to speak if they need to." After Rebecca left, I sat in my study surrounded by theological texts and prayer books, feeling more lost than I'd ever felt in my entire ministry. Sophia's revelation about my supposed fatherhood seemed almost secondary to this growing awareness that our parish might be harboring secrets that endangered the most vulnerable among us. I opened my Bible to Matthew 18:6. "If anyone causes one of these little ones, those who believe in me, to stumble, it would be better for them to have a large millstone hung around their neck and to be drowned in the depths of the sea." The words seemed to burn on the page. How many times had I read this passage about protecting children? How many sermons had I preached about our responsibility to the innocent? Yet here I was, potentially sitting on information that could help young people in danger, paralyzed by the very vows that should empower me to act. As I knelt to pray that night, I felt the weight of impossible choices pressing down on me. Above my head, Sophia slept peacefully in the guest room, trusting that I would care for her. Somewhere in our community, other children might be going to bed afraid, looking for shepherds who seemed nowhere to be found. The next morning brought a phone call that would shatter any remaining illusions I had about the sanctuary of our church community. What the caller revealed about Maria's final weeks and her desperate attempts to protect not just Sophia, but other children in our congregation will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about the people sitting next to you in church every Sunday. The phone call that Friday morning came from Dr. Sarah Chen at Children's Hospital, and her voice carried an urgency that immediately set my nerves on edge. Sophia had been living with me for 2 weeks now, and I thought we'd established a comfortable routine. I was wrong. Father O'Brien, I need to speak with you about Sophia's medical history. We've discovered something during her routine physical that requires immediate attention. My hands trembled as I gripped the phone. What kind of something? I'd rather discuss this in person. Can you bring Sophia in this afternoon? And Father, you might want to prepare yourself for some difficult questions about her family background. The drive to the hospital felt endless. Sophia sat quietly beside me, her small hands folded in her lap, seemingly unaware that our world was about to shift again. "Are you worried about the doctor visit?" she asked suddenly. "Just routine stuff, sweetheart," I lied, hating myself for the deception. Dr. Chen met us in her office, her expression professional but troubled. After examining Sophia's test results, she asked to speak with me privately. My heart pounded as we stepped into the hallway. "Father, Sophia's blood work reveals some genetic markers that suggest potential hereditary conditions. Nothing immediately dangerous, but conditions that typically run in families. The problem is we have no medical history for either parent." I felt the color drain from my face. "What exactly are you saying?" "I need comprehensive family medical information to properly monitor her health going forward. Specifically, I need to know about both her biological parents' medical histories. This isn't optional. Her long-term well-being could depend on it." The weight of Dr. Chen's words settled over me like a heavy blanket. Sophia needed information that might save her life someday, yet I had no legal right to access Maria's medical records, and I certainly couldn't provide information about a father I didn't know existed. "How urgent is this?" I asked. "We can manage for now, but if certain symptoms develop, we'll need those family histories immediately. Days could matter, not months." That evening, after tucking Sophia into bed, I found myself in the church sanctuary at nearly midnight, prostrate before the altar in a way I hadn't done since seminary. The weight of impossible choices pressed down on my shoulders like a physical burden. "Lord," I whispered into the darkness, "I've served you faithfully for 23 years. I've kept every confidence, honored every sacred trust. But this child's life might depend on information I don't have. Show me the way." The silence that followed felt deafening. Sunday's sermon practically wrote itself, though I questioned every word. Standing before my congregation, I looked directly at faces I now suspected held secrets that could destroy families. "Today we're examining the story of King Solomon and the two mothers," I began, my voice carrying across the sanctuary. "When faced with two women claiming the same child, Solomon proposed cutting the baby in half. The real mother immediately offered to give up her claim rather than see her child harmed." I paused, letting the weight of the story settle over the congregation. Sometimes love requires us to make choices that break our own hearts to protect those we care about. Sometimes keeping a secret becomes more harmful than revealing it. From the corner of my eye, I noticed several parishioners shifting uncomfortably. Martha Williams was crying silently in the fourth pew. Bob Henderson kept checking his watch nervously, and in the back row, a woman I'd never seen before was staring at me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. After the service, that same stranger approached me with measured steps. She was middle-aged, well-dressed, with cold eyes that seemed to calculate every word before speaking. "Interesting sermon, Father," she said, extending her hand. "I'm Dr. Patricia Manning. I'm a geneticist at the State University, and I couldn't help but notice the little girl with you. She bears a remarkable resemblance to someone I once knew." My blood turned to ice. "I'm sorry, I don't understand." "Maria Sanchez was once Maria Kowalski. We were research partners 15 years ago, before she disappeared from the academic world entirely. That child has her eyes, but there's something else, something familiar about her features that I can't quite place." Dr. Manning's words hit me like a physical blow. Maria had a hidden academic past, possibly even a different identity. The web of secrets was growing more complex by the hour. "I'd be happy to help with any medical questions about the child's background," Dr. Manning continued. "Given my history with Maria, I might have information that could be useful." After she left, I felt like I was drowning in a sea of partial truths and unanswered questions. That afternoon, I made a decision that went against every instinct of my training. I called Bishop Morrison. "Tom," I said, using his first name, as we'd done since our seminary days together, "I need guidance on a matter involving the seal of confession." "Michael, you know I can't advise you to break that seal under any circumstances. But what if a child's life is at stake? What if maintaining silence could result in serious harm to an innocent?" The long pause that followed told me everything I needed to know about the impossibility of my situation. "Pray," Bishop Morrison finally said. "Pray for wisdom and trust that God will provide a way that honors both your vows and your pastoral heart." But prayer wasn't enough anymore. That Tuesday evening, as I helped Sophia with her homework at the kitchen table, she looked up at me with those dark eyes that Dr. Manning had found so familiar. "Father Michael, why won't anyone tell me about my daddy? Mama said she would explain everything when I got older, but she's not here anymore." The simple question from this precious child shattered something inside me. Here was an innocent little girl, possibly facing medical challenges, definitely facing a future without family connections, all because the adults in her life had woven a web of secrets too complex to unravel. That night, I made a decision that would either save Sophia or destroy my ministry forever. I picked up the phone to call Dr. Manning back, knowing that what she was about to reveal about Maria's hidden past would change everything, and lead me to a discovery so shocking that it would make Sophia's original claim about my fatherhood seem like the smallest piece of an unbelievable puzzle. What Dr. Manning told me about Maria's secret life and the biological experiment that connected us all will leave you questioning everything you think you know about identity, destiny, and the terrifying lengths some people will go to in the name of science. Dr. Manning's phone call came at 2:17 a.m. on a Thursday, jolting me from the first deep sleep I'd managed in weeks. Her voice carried a panic that immediately sent adrenaline coursing through my veins. "Father O'Brien, I need to see you immediately. It's about Maria's research and why she really disappeared 15 years ago. There's another woman in danger, and we may already be too late." I threw on my clothes and drove through empty streets to meet her at an all-night diner downtown. Dr. Manning looked like she hadn't slept either, her usually composed demeanor replaced by barely controlled urgency. "I've been researching Maria's past since we spoke," she began, sliding a thick folder across the table. "What I found terrifies me. Maria wasn't just a geneticist. She was involved in experimental fertility treatments that crossed ethical boundaries." My blood ran cold as she continued. "The research program was shut down after allegations of unauthorized genetic modifications and falsified consent forms. Maria disappeared right before the investigation concluded. Several women who participated in the trials never learned the truth about what was done to them." "What kind of truth?" I whispered, though part of me dreaded the answer. "DNA manipulation, artificial insemination with modified genetic material, experimental hormone treatments, all without full informed consent. The women thought they were receiving standard fertility help. Instead, they became unwitting participants in genetic experiments." The diner suddenly felt suffocating. "How many women?" "We documented at least 12 cases before the program collapsed. But here's what has me panicked, Father. I've been tracking the research, and yesterday I discovered that someone has been continuing the work. There's a woman named Jennifer Walsh who just started similar treatments at a clinic 2 towns over. The doctor running it matches the description of Maria's former research partner." Dr. Manning leaned forward, her eyes intense. "Father, if Maria confided anything to you about the location of research files or the identities of other participants, innocent women could be in danger right now. Jennifer Walsh is pregnant, and she has no idea what's really being done to her." I felt the weight of impossible choices crushing down on me. Here was concrete evidence that someone was continuing dangerous experiments on unsuspecting women, and potentially the only person who could stop it was bound by sacred vows to remain silent. "I can't share anything Maria may have told me in confidence," I said, hating how hollow the words sounded. even if it means other women suffer the same fate, even if children are born with genetic modifications they never consented to. That Friday afternoon, as if the universe was determined to test my resolve, I received another call that shattered what remained of my composure. Detective Ryan Walsh from the state police wanted to meet with me about Maria's death. "Father, we've received some anonymous tips suggesting Maria Sanchez wasn't her real name and that her death might be connected to a larger investigation. We need to ask if she shared any information with you that might help us protect other potential victims." I sat in my office, staring at the crucifix on my wall, feeling like Job facing trials beyond human endurance. On one side, sacred vows that had governed my entire adult life. On the other, innocent women and children who needed protection I could provide. That evening, I found myself in the church sanctuary again, but this time I wasn't alone. Sophia had followed me from the rectory, slipping quietly into a front pew. She sat there for nearly an hour, just watching me pray before finally speaking. "Father Michael, are you sad because of Mama's secrets?" I turned to look at this remarkable child, this little girl who had turned my world upside down with a single declaration. "What do you know about your Mama's secrets, sweetheart?" She used to cry at night sometimes and write in her special journal. She said she did something bad a long time ago, but she was trying to make it right. She said keeping secrets sometimes hurts more people than telling the truth. Sophia's innocent words hit me like lightning. Here was wisdom from the mouth of a child, echoing Jesus' own teachings about the voices of the innocent. I felt something shift in my chest, a loosening of the knots that had been strangling my conscience. "Sophia, did your mama ever tell you where she kept that special journal?" "It's in our apartment, hidden behind the loose board in my closet. She showed me once and said if anything ever happened to her, I should give it to someone who would know what to do with it." I stared at this child in amazement. Sophia wasn't just making random claims about my fatherhood. She was trying to lead me toward information that could save other people. Was this divine providence working through the voice of an innocent? The next morning, I accompanied Sophia to her mother's apartment to collect more of her belongings. Behind the loose floorboard in her closet, we found Maria's journal, along with a small metal box containing computer drives and documents. With trembling hands, I opened the journal to find page after page of Maria's handwriting, documenting her growing horror as she realized the true nature of the research program she'd been part of. The final entries were even more disturbing. "Dr. Peterson has moved the program to a new location. He's still conducting the experiments, still lying to women about what he's doing to them. I have all the evidence needed to stop him, but coming forward means destroying the lives I've built for Sophia and myself. Yet, how can I stay silent when I know other women will suffer?" The last entry was dated just 3 weeks before her death. "I've made my decision. I'm going to turn over all the evidence to the authorities, regardless of the consequences. Sophia deserves to grow up in a world where the truth matters more than convenience. If something happens to me, I pray someone will finish what I started." I sat on Sophia's bedroom floor, surrounded by evidence that could save innocent women, holding the journal of a woman who had died trying to do the right thing. In that moment, I understood that my choice wasn't between following the rules and breaking them. It was between honoring Maria's final sacrifice or letting it be meaningless. Standing up with newfound resolve, I made a decision that would either redeem my ministry or end it forever. I picked up my phone to call Detective Walsh, knowing that what I was about to reveal would not only expose the truth about the genetic experiments, but also lead to a discovery about Sophia's true parentage that would prove more shocking than anything science fiction could imagine. The scientific horror Maria died trying to expose will make you question everything you think you know about modern medicine, and the revelation about who Sophia really is will leave you speechless. The call to Detective Walsh unleashed a chain of events that moved faster than I could have imagined. Within hours of providing Maria's evidence, state police had raided Dr. Peterson's clinic and arrested him along with 2 associates. The genetic experiments that had haunted Maria's conscience were finally exposed to the light, but nothing could have prepared me for what happened next. That Friday afternoon, my phone rang with a call that would forever change how I understood God's mysterious ways. It was Detective Walsh, and his voice carried a mixture of professional composure and personal shock. "Father O'Brien, we need to meet immediately. The DNA evidence we've uncovered, it's not what anyone expected. You're going to want to sit down for this conversation." An hour later, sitting in my office with Detective Walsh and Dr. Chen, I listened to revelations that defied everything I thought I knew about Sophia, Maria, and myself. "Father," Dr. Chen began carefully, "when we ran genetic tests on the evidence from Maria's apartment, we made some extraordinary discoveries. Sophia's DNA shows markers that are unusual, very unusual." Detective Walsh leaned forward. "The experiments Dr. Peterson was conducting weren't just about fertility treatments. He was attempting to create what he called enhanced genetic combinations, basically trying to produce children with specific intellectual and physical traits." My hands began to tremble. "What does this have to do with Sophia?" "According to the research files we recovered," Dr. Chen continued, "Maria was one of Dr. Peterson's earliest successes. Sophia wasn't conceived naturally, Father. She was created through artificial insemination using genetic material that had been modified." The room began to spin around me. Modified how? Detective Walsh consulted his notes. "The files indicate that Dr. Peterson collected genetic material from individuals he considered exceptional. People with high intelligence, strong moral character, leadership qualities. He then used experimental techniques to combine and enhance these traits." "Father," Dr. Chen said gently, "Sophia's genetic profile shows contributions from multiple donors. Based on the laboratory records we've recovered, one of those donors appears to be you." I stared at them in complete bewilderment. "That's impossible. I've never donated genetic material to any facility." "The records suggest otherwise," Detective Walsh said. "Do you remember undergoing any medical procedures about 11 years ago? Perhaps during a hospital stay after an accident?" The memory hit me like a physical blow. 10 years ago, I'd been severely injured in a car accident while serving at my previous parish. I'd spent 3 weeks in the hospital, much of it unconscious. During that time, I'd been told that various medical procedures had been performed to save my life. "The hospital records show that Dr. Peterson was consulting on your case," Dr. Chen explained. "He apparently collected genetic material during your treatment, claiming it was for routine medical testing." I felt sick to my stomach. "So Sophia is—" "Genetically, she shares approximately 40% of your DNA, combined with Maria's and genetic material from at least 2 other donors. She's not your daughter in any traditional sense, but she's not entirely unrelated either." Detective Walsh continued, "Maria discovered the truth about Sophia's conception shortly before her death. She realized that Dr. Peterson had used her and other women as incubators for his genetic experiments. That's why she was collecting evidence to expose him." The pieces suddenly fell into place with devastating clarity. Sophia's unusual intelligence, her deep spiritual intuition, her inexplicable claim that I was her father. It all made sense now. She hadn't been lying or confused. On some level, she had sensed the genetic connection between us. "There's more," Detective Walsh said grimly. "We've identified 12 other children born through similar procedures. Some are living with families who have no idea their children were genetically modified. Others are in situations where the families suspect something but don't know what." My pastoral instincts immediately kicked in. "Do these families know yet? We're in the process of contacting them now. We're going to need your help, Father. These families are going to need spiritual guidance to process this information. Some of the children are members of your congregation." Over the next several days, St. Joseph's Parish became the center of a storm unlike anything our community had ever experienced. The revelation about Dr. Peterson's experiments made national news, but for our small congregation, it was deeply personal. The Henderson family discovered that their daughter Ashley wasn't biologically theirs, but had been created using genetic material from 5 different donors The shock nearly destroyed them until they realized that this explained Ashley's extraordinary artistic abilities and why she'd always seemed different from her siblings. The Rodriguez family faced the opposite situation. Their son Tommy was genetically related to them, but had been enhanced with additional genetic material that gave him exceptional mathematical abilities. Miguel and Carmen struggled with feelings of anger and violation, yet couldn't deny their love for the boy they'd raised. Most challenging was the Wilson family. They learned that their 8-year-old daughter, Emma, shared genetic material with Ashley Henderson. The two girls were essentially genetic sisters, created by the same experimental process, though raised in different families. As news spread through our community, I watched families grapple with questions that had no easy answers. Some parents felt betrayed and violated. Others focused on the love they'd always felt for their children, regardless of their genetic origins. A few struggled with whether to maintain relationships with children who weren't biologically theirs. Through it all, I found my role shifting from confused participant to spiritual guide for an entire community in crisis. Every evening, I held special prayer services for families affected by the revelations. I counseled parents wrestling with feelings of anger, confusion, and love. I helped children understand that their worth came from God's love, not from the circumstances of their conception. The most profound moment came during a Sunday service 3 weeks after the truth emerged. Sophia, with her characteristic wisdom, asked if she could address the congregation. Standing at the pulpit, this remarkable 9-year-old spoke words that still echo in my heart. I know some people are confused about who my real daddy is, but I think maybe God used a lot of people to make me, just like He uses lots of people to make our church family. Father Michael loves me like a daddy, even if the science is complicated, and maybe that's what matters most. Her simple words broke through weeks of confusion and anger, reminding us all that love transcends genetics, and family is defined by commitment, not just DNA. But even as our community began to heal from these revelations, I knew the most challenging part of our journey lay ahead. The legal, emotional, and spiritual consequences of Dr. Peterson's experiments would reshape our understanding of family, identity, and faith in ways that would test every belief we held sacred. What happened next in our journey toward healing and forgiveness will challenge everything you think you know about the nature of family, the power of love, and the incredible ways God can create beauty from the most complex human circumstances. 1 year later, as I prepared for Easter service at St. Joseph's, I reflected on the miraculous transformation our community had undergone. What began as the most challenging crisis of my ministry had become a testament to the power of faith, forgiveness, and the inexplicable ways God works through human brokenness. The legal proceedings had concluded 6 months earlier. Dr. Peterson received a lengthy prison sentence for his unauthorized experiments, while his associates faced their own consequences. But more importantly, the families affected by his actions had chosen a path of healing rather than revenge. The process hadn't been easy. Those first few months tested every family involved in ways none of us could have anticipated. The Henderson family went through intensive counseling before deciding to adopt Ashley officially, choosing love over biology. Miguel and Carmen Rodriguez embraced Tommy's genetic complexity, seeing it as God's unique gift rather than scientific violation. Perhaps most remarkably, the Wilson and Henderson families formed an extraordinary bond. Ashley and Emma, the two girls who shared genetic material, became sisters by choice rather than just science. Their families began spending holidays together, creating a new model of what family could mean in our modern world. Sophia continued living with me, and after much prayer and consultation with church leadership, I was granted special permission to adopt her while remaining in ministry. Our relationship defied traditional categories, not quite father and daughter in the conventional sense, but bound by love, faith, and yes, that 40% genetic connection that science had revealed. The most profound transformation came from an unexpected source. Dr. Margaret Ellis, the woman whose confessions had started this entire journey, requested to meet with me 6 months after her arrest. I found her in the county detention center, a broken woman who had finally found the courage to face the full weight of her actions. "Father Michael," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "I've spent every day since my arrest thinking about the children I helped create and the families I affected. I know I can never undo what I did, but I want to spend whatever life I have left making amends." Dr. Ellis had been Dr. Peterson's lead researcher, the one who had convinced herself that their work was advancing human potential rather than exploiting vulnerable people. Her path to redemption began with a complete confession that helped authorities identify additional victims and provided closure for affected families. "I want to work with geneticists who are studying the long-term effects of the procedures," she continued. "These children deserve to have their unique medical needs understood and met. If my expertise can help protect them, then perhaps some good can come from my terrible choices." True to her word, Dr. Ellis spent her remaining time in detention writing detailed medical protocols for monitoring the health of children affected by the experiments. She also established a fund using her personal assets to provide ongoing medical care and counseling for the families involved. The spiritual journey for our congregation proved equally transformative. I found myself preaching sermons I never could have imagined before this crisis. Messages about the nature of family that transcends blood relations, about God's ability to create beauty from broken circumstances, about forgiveness that heals both the forgiver and the forgiven. Love, I told my congregation one Sunday, isn't diminished by complexity. The children in our community who were created through unconventional means aren't less precious to God because of their origins. If anything, they remind us that divine love works through mysteries we may never fully understand. The children themselves became our greatest teachers. Sophia's wisdom continued to astound everyone who knew her. Ashley Henderson discovered that her enhanced artistic abilities allowed her to create paintings that brought comfort to other families facing medical crises. Tommy Rodriguez used his mathematical gifts to tutor struggling students, turning his genetic modifications into a gift for his entire community. Emma Wilson and Ashley Henderson started a support group for other children born through assisted reproductive technologies, helping them understand that being different could be a blessing rather than a burden. As Easter morning dawned, I looked out at our congregation and saw something beautiful. The families affected by Dr. Peterson's experiments sat together, not segregated by their shared trauma, but integrated into our church family. Dr. Ellis, now serving her sentence but granted permission for supervised community service, worked quietly in our food pantry, living out her commitment to redemption through service. Sophia sat in the front pew, no longer the confused and grieving child from that shocking funeral day, but a confident young girl who knew exactly who she was, beloved by God, cherished by our community, and connected to me by bonds stronger than genetics or conventional understanding. "Christ is risen," I proclaimed to our congregation, the familiar words carrying new meaning after our year of trial and transformation. "He is risen indeed," came the response, and I heard in those voices not just liturgical tradition, but genuine testimony from people who had experienced resurrection in their own lives. After the service, as families gathered for our traditional Easter celebration, I found myself in conversation with Maria's memory. Looking at Sophia laughing with her friends, surrounded by the complex but loving family our congregation had become, I felt Maria's presence and her approval. She had died trying to expose the truth that could protect other women and children. Her sacrifice had indeed saved lives, not just by stopping Dr. Peterson's experiments, but by showing all of us that families are built on love, commitment, and faith rather than just genetic chance. "Thank you," I whispered to her memory. "Your daughter is surrounded by love, and your courage saved more people than you could have known." As the afternoon sun streamed through our stained glass windows, casting those familiar rainbow patterns across our fellowship hall, I understood that God's greatest miracles often come disguised as our greatest challenges. The crisis that had nearly destroyed my understanding of family and faith had instead expanded both beyond anything I could have imagined. Sophia approached me as the celebration wound down, her eyes bright with the joy of a child who knew she was loved completely and unconditionally. "Father Michael," she said, taking my hand, "do you think Mama knows how everything turned out?" I looked at this remarkable child, part my genetics, part Maria's sacrifice, part divine mystery, and felt overwhelming gratitude for the ways God writes straight with crooked lines. "I believe she does, sweetheart, and I believe she's very proud of the family we've all become together." Sometimes the most profound truths emerge from the most complex circumstances. Love transcends science, family exceeds biology, and faith can transform even the most devastating revelations into foundations for deeper understanding. In a world where the definition of family continues to evolve, our small congregation learned that what makes us family isn't the perfection of our origins, but the depth of our commitment to love one another through every truth that emerges along the way. And in that love, we found not just healing, but hope for a future where every child, no matter how they come to be, knows they are fearfully and wonderfully made in the image of a God whose love surpasses all human understanding. Subscribe if you agree.